Hello everyone, I am Priyanka Wilson and welcome to GS-2 series of decoding the UPSC preparation with macro topic detailing. Governance and social justice represents a very important area for UPSC Civil Services Examination both for prelims and mains. While various schemas, policies and programs and related concepts are frequently asked in prelims examination, their analysis holds special importance for mains examination in GS paper 2. The subject accounts for average for 100 marks. The knowledge about the topics with both explicit and implicit are the key to understanding and mastering this subject. So in this video, Abhishek Saxena sir will explore the topics and subtopics related to governance and social justice in great details along with the approach to tackle them. So guys, if you like this video, so please like, share and subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for regular updates. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to GS Core. My name is Abhishek Saxena and I am a faculty here. So in today's session, we'll be talking about governance and social justice. As the session has been titled Syllabus Explained, we are going to break the syllabus given by the UPSC with regards to governance and social justice and try and look at the intricacies of the syllabus, try and read between the lines to find out those very crucial areas which often does not meet the eyes but yet are important from the point of view of the examination. We'll be looking at the syllabus from the perspective of the mains examination as well as the prelims examination. To examine this further, we'll be taking up certain questions as samples which have been asked in the examination before to show that how the syllabus gets reflected in the examination in the form of questions. So to begin with, when I say governance and social justice, we are often given with a certain abstract criteria that okay, it is polity and governance or polity, governance and social justice, right? So while the polity forms the structural part, the governance and social justice form the functional part. So while acts, their manifestations, their legality, etc., the structure of the government, so on and so forth, will find its relevance with regards to the subject of Indian polity. The implementative aspects, the functional aspects, what do these things actually lead to, etc., their appreciation, their interlinkages, it all comes within the realm of governance and social justice. In the prelims examination, the governance and social justice are not being defined as an explicit area. However, the various policies, the programs, the legislations, they do find certain mention in the prelims question paper, right? At the same time, some deductive logic regarding their functioning also gets reflected in the prelims examination. So the cue for the prelims examination lies in the syllabus of the mains examination. So that's the point to note. Also, when we talk about the syllabus, and for your convenience, I have basically categorized the syllabus into 9 different heads. When I say 9 different heads, I mean that the entire strings of the syllabus have been categorized with some heading that I have given to make it convenient for you to remember and link. Along with those 9 categorization, an important macro idea is about the key concepts which are related to governance. So if we will see the syllabus for the GS paper 2 in the UPSC mains examination, we find the mention of these sentences and topics, right? And the ones in red are the headings, which I have given for ease of understanding and for dividing the syllabus to study. However, a very pertinent point to be noted here is that the questions in the examination are of interlinkages nature. They are interdependent on the various concepts as well as the various heads. For example, we can talk about the role of NGOs in ensuring transparency and accountability. At the same time, we can talk about health and the role of local governments in provision of healthcare for provision for healthcare for citizens. So these concepts, though for studies, have to be divided in silos, and for understanding needs to be studied separately, but that understanding has to get fused, that has to get mixed in a manner that we can interlink these ideas along with current affairs to enrich our answers and to justify the demands of the questions which are asked. More about that later in this particular session when we'll take up certain questions. So let me walk you through the broad categorization which I have made, and we'll be taking up each one of them separately to look at the various intricacies of the syllabus. So the first categorization that I have made is about local government. Okay, where the syllabus talks about devolution of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein. You see, the implementation, the functional part appears. So while the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment, etc., would largely form the skeletal of this, but that lies in the realm of polity. But the implementation part comes under the governance. Similarly, with regards to various stakeholders that form the part of the governance landscape, NGOs, SHGs, groups, associations, various institutions that have been given under the head of pressure groups. And this very categorization has been mentioned in the syllabus. Also, when we talk about prelims, we often go for compilations of various policies, programs, acts, right? But all these are what? These are interventions which the government makes in order to govern. So these policies and interventions have been categorized in a separate head. However, if we look at the syllabus, it talks about development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. So governance requires not just the factual knowledge of these acts, policies and other intervention. It also demands an appraisal of how good or bad they are. At the same time, the key issue of transparency, accountability and e-governance also form a very important part of the syllabus, where we talk about the concepts of transparency and accountability, the practical mechanisms to implement them or to enforce them. Okay, at the same time, various other devices and innovations in the governance landscape, for example, citizens charter, ombudsman, etc. We talk about all of it as part of this particular section. Then what does the government do? It does everything for the public good. So some of the most important pillars of that public good are education and health. At the same time, the development of human resources so that the citizens can realize their potential. So social sectors like health, education and human resources assume significance. Moving on to the further divisions, poverty and hunger. Such issues also form an important part of our syllabus. At the same time, the civil service, the very examination you all are preparing for, how does that civil service fit into this scheme of things? Rather, not just fit, but derives all these things and becomes a key element of the government in action, or we call governance. So, how does that role of civil services gets demarcated? What all acts it is expected to perform? What are the prevailing issues? What are the possible solutions? How things can be corrected? All those form the discourse under this particular head of role of civil services in a democracy. At the same time, regulatory bodies, the head which I have given for all sort of regulatory, statutory and various quasi-judicial bodies. You have various commissions, various bodies to regulate the market, right? So all those form important here. At the same time, the welfare schemes for vulnerable sections, the mechanisms, laws, institutions, bodies, your Transgenders Act, your National Council for Women, National Commission for Women, the National Council for Transgenders, okay, everything will form the part of our discourse on governance. Remember, when we talk about governance, it is not just about the state, but the multi-stakeholder, multi-dimensional paradigm. So, it's not just about what government does, it is also about how government does it. And in that, government is one of the most crucial players. There are other players. So, that brings us to the very first head for this particular session, that is the key concepts. What is governance? What is good governance? If there is something good, was there anything bad? All those analysis which provide the conceptual bedrock through which we see all the 9 heads that I have mentioned is the right approach to be taken while studying governance. So when we talk about governance, good governance, we'll have to talk about the history of how these paradigms came into being, how the state or the government is related to the citizens and vice versa. What all do we talk about when we talk about governance and good governance? The idea of a networked approach to govern is called governance, wherein state is one of the players. The other players are market, the civil society. And how does this network operate to govern? Under what conditions the forces of liberalization, privatization, globalization, the idea of welfare, and how does this network fit into all these schemes? Whether we talk about welfarism, whether we talk about socialism, whether we talk about the liberalization, privatization and globalization. At the same time, when we say this is governance, then what is good governance? There must be certain principles. Those principles, what do we understand by transparency, accountability, responsiveness, participation, rule of law, openness, efficiency and effectiveness. All those will form the bedrock of our conceptual understanding for the governance and social justice. At the same time, the definition given by the global institutions, the scholars, for example, the World Bank, the OECD, all that will form the realm of the basics of governance and social justice to understand the subject from its very fundamentals. Once we develop this understanding, then we move to the segments which we have divided and study them in a methodological fashion, and then we interlink them. Okay, so let us move to the very first segment. Okay, but before that, the core concepts and the way they have reflected in the examination. For example, this particular question does take into account the issue of hunger and human development, right? But it also talks about an area of the basic concept of governance, wherein it asks, how far do you agree with the view that focus on lack of availability of food is the main cause of hunger, that takes the attention away from ineffective human development policies in India? So it appeals not only to a specific problem of hunger, but in the larger context of governance, that how do we as a state, as a society function to provide governance? How does this triloka of state, market, civil society under the larger ambit of transparency, accountability, responsiveness, so on and so forth, operate to mitigate hunger? So you see, the concepts are basic, but the question is of highly interlinked nature. This question demonstrates the true DNA of governance, how it gets reflected in the examination. Similarly, the second question, though women in the post-independent India have excelled in various fields, the social attitude towards women and feminist movement has been patriarchal. Apart from women education and women empowerment schemes, what interventions can help change this milieu? So this question is of fairly recent vintage, as it was asked in the year 2021. So while it talks about women at the core, it talks about the larger governance discourse regarding the empowerment of women. So those key concepts, the mechanics of how those concepts operate, are very crucial for us to understand to answer the questions effectively. Moving on. A similar approach is reflected in the prelims examination, where based on certain concepts, we need to derive certain deductions. So it talks about cabinet form of government. While on the first instance, we may think that this belongs purely to polity, it has certain implementative dimensions as part of the statements for us to understand. The arrangement for minimizing criticism against the government, whose responsibilities are complex and hard to carry out to the satisfaction of all. A mechanism for speeding up the activities of government, whose responsibilities are increasing day by day. A mechanism of parliamentary democracy for ensuring collective responsibility of the government to the people. A device for strengthening the hands of the heads of the government, whose hold over the people is in a state of decline. So instead of just the structural elements, we'll have to dig deeper as part of governance to understand the larger philosophical as well as the implementative and functional elements to decipher such questions. So when we talk about the accountability, how executive is accountable to the legislature at large, and if we know about the concept of accountability and its manifestation in the structure of Government of India, we can easily deduce that it is the option C. So hence, governance holds importance not just for the mains examination, where it gets reflected in the form of 100 odd marks as part of GS paper 2. It is also very significant and pertinent for the prelims examination. Now, let us move further and dig deeper into the syllabus that we have categorized. So the first head was local government, and the statement which is given in our syllabus is devolution of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein. So we'll obviously be talking about the local government when we say the Panchayati Raj institutions, the urban local bodies. Okay, but it's not just a skeletal overview of the Panchayati Raj institutions and urban local bodies. We'll have to talk about the powers, the finances up to local levels, the challenges therein. So the issues of funds, functions, functionaries, the role of various stakeholders and agencies, the district collector, the district rural development authorities, the role of elected representatives, MPs, MLAs, councillors, the punches, and the structure at various levels. The issues of finance brings us to the area of State Finance Commission, grants which are given by the state or the central government. At the same time, the functions, how various urban as well as rural local bodies are endowed with certain functions, how there is a conflict of interest in certain functions, how the adequate manpower is not there, the issues, the challenges, right? So we'll be talking about them. At the same time, this very area gets reflected in conjunction with other areas. For example, efficacy of PRIs in providing healthcare. So the role of Anganwadis, the role of ASHA workers. At the same time, if we look at it from the angle of women empowerment, we'll talk about representation of women in PRIs, the 33% reservation in PRIs and urban local bodies. Then the related issues like Panchayat Pati, okay. Then the issues related to capacity building. How can PRIs and urban local bodies be the grassroots interventionists for environment conservation? How they act as agencies of deepening democracy? How they act as agencies of bottom-up governance? So all those discourses will find mention here. Okay. So each of these categorization presents us with a universe of dimensions that we have to take up. At the same time, when we talk about local government, we'll have to talk about the various levels, the Gram Sabha, the Panchayat, Panchayat Samiti, so on and so forth. Each of those levels, their composition, the powers, the functions, the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, they are bearing on the local governments. The history of how various committees recommended the structure for the third tier of government. So all those will find mention here. Now, with local government, let us move, to see how the questions get reflected in the examination. So, when we see the questions are, as I said, with the governance, the interrelation, the multi-stakeholder, multi-dimensional element is at the very core. So, the same thing gets reflected in the question. So, these questions are of fairly recent vintage, 2019-2020. So, the question says, the reservation of seats for women in the institution of local self-government has had a limited impact on the patriarchal character of the Indian political process. So, with Indian polity, when we know 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, we can simply talk about the structural elements. But governance demands deeper digging into the implementative aspects, wherein, just like I said, we'll have to look at local government from the various lenses. Whether we talk about environment, whether we talk about gender justice, whether we talk about efficacy, effectiveness, inclusivity, participation, etc. Right? And those all lenses will be found in the key concepts. So, it similarly talks about the patriarchal character and has linked the local self-government here. Okay. The next sample for you. The strength, sustenance of local institution in India has shifted from their formative phase of functions, functionaries and funds to the contemporary stage of functionality. Highlight the critical challenges faced by local institutions in terms of their functionality in recent times. So again, the question belongs to the core, but when we talk about the functionality, we'll have to talk into the structural lacunas, the implementation hiccups, as well as the legal loopholes, the behavioral loopholes, right? The political loopholes which exist in the system. So, this demands an eclectic and wide study of the concepts. Moving on, how this particular topic gets reflected in the prelims examination. So, this question is again about panchayats. The minimum age prescribed for any person to become a member of panchayat is 25 years. A panchayat reconstituted after premature dissolution. This is also an issue when we talk about the study of panchayats and urban local bodies. The premature dissolution when state governments change the continues only for the remainder period. Right? So we should know about not just the structural but some sort of a deductive information to answer questions effectively in the prelims examination. Let us move to the next heading. So when we talk about the pressure groups heading which I have given, we talk about development process, the development industry, the role of NGOs, SHGs, various groups and associations, donors, charities, institutional and other stakeholders. So we'll be talking about development process and development industry, then we'll be alluding to the concept of what is development. Is it synonymous with economic growth, or there's something more, right? So that more aspect needs to be studied. Then the thesis of the various scholars, for example, Amartya Sen, how he views development. Okay. Then what all are the components of development, the challenges, the barriers, the various components of development, the idea of sustainability and sustainable development. Right? And many more ideas. So, just to talk about this, we'll have to understand a plethora of concepts. Then obviously, when we talk about NGOs, SHGs, we'll have to talk about their history, their origins, what do they do, whether they are good or bad, in what measure are they effective, what are their limitations, challenges. At the same time, various groups and associations, your farm associations, labor groups, right? Various donors and charities, and that brings us into the realm of FCRA, PEMA. We often read in news that there have been curbs on NGOs regarding their foreign funding, cases have been registered under FCRA, so on and so forth, right? So all these will find place in our studies. At the same time, the institutional and other stakeholders, how the various ministries, the various development related institutions interact with these, your Niti Ayogs, the state planning bodies and ministries, how NGOs basically participate in the development process, the self-help groups, NABARD, bank linkage program, the microfinance aspect, how microfinance institutions work, what are their pros, cons, right? All these things will find place in our discourse when we'll be discussing governance and social justice and this particular head. Okay. Now let us try and look at this through certain questions which have been asked. So let me reiterate that I said that the questions get reflected in a very, very interlinked manner. So that is for us to see. And the questions are fairly recent, that is of 2021 mains. Can the vicious cycle of gender inequality, so a gender element is here, the poverty and malnutrition, the poverty gets explicit mention in the syllabus for governance. Malnutrition is obviously a linked aspect which we'll see, to be broken through microfinancing of women SHGs. Explain with examples. Okay, so the role of women SHGs is central, but very, very important are the elements of gender inequality, poverty and malnutrition. So if we know what SHGs are doing, what good they are doing, what are their challenges, limitations, issues, then we can easily take up these aspects, provided we know when we say gender inequality, what are we talking about. Similarly, the other question, civil society and non-governmental organizations present an alternative model of public service delivery to benefit the common citizen. Discuss the challenges of this alternative model. So, if we mechanically read what are the challenges and issues with NGOs, we can never answer this question to the level of satisfaction. We'll also have to study that how civil society organization and NGOs basically assist in public service delivery as well as enhancing the quality of public service delivery. So that conceptual understanding of interlinking these various aspects is of prime importance in governance. And under that light, we'll have to cloak the challenges to answer this question effectively. Similarly, questions in the preliminary examination also talk about certain other associations. For example, this particular question, which refers to the Bar Council. The government law officers and legal firms are recognized as advocates, but corporate lawyers and patent attorneys are excluded from recognition as advocates. Bar councils have the power to lay down the rules relating to legal education, recognition of law colleges. So when we talk about education and as a sector, and when we'll take that up as part of social sector services, we'll have to realize that we will be talking about not just what kind of education do we have, but also the various structures under the education ecosystem, the regulatory bodies for education, right? The bodies which provide recognition, the bodies which provide standardization. Okay, so all those things will have to be studied. So hence they get reflected in the preliminary examination as well. Bar councils, of course, are a form of group. Okay. Moving on to the next head, policies and interventions. Government policies and interventions of development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. When I say various sectors, I mean all the sectors. But we need not fret in the sense that current affairs and established policies which are in implementation basically demarcate the periphery of our interest when we talk about this particular head. For example, the National Education Policy, which is of recent vintage, the National Health Policy, which has been in news regarding various implementations regarding it, whether we talk about the Ayushman Bharat or National Digital Health Mission, CoWIN, etc. Right? At the same time, the various interventions which government makes. For example, we can talk about how a PLI scheme was there to boost manufacturing. Similarly, policies, for example, a battery swap policy is in the anvil, which was taken up or proposed in the budget 2022. So that battery swap policy is of our interest. That makes the emerging sector like electronic vehicles of our interest and our study regarding this. At the same time, the policies and interventions for various sectors regarding empowerment, let us say, of disabled, empowerment of women, furthering the cause of climate change, okay. So many policies will be taken up. Along with this, when we say design and implementation, we'll have to do analysis in terms of where these policies are good, where they are found wanting, what are the possible suggestions, what are the models which are present. We can talk about international as well as domestic models, right? At the same time, when we say these policies and interventions, we can also talk about the various indices. For example, multidimensional poverty index, or ease of doing business, the various reports, right? World Economic Outlook, the global agencies and how they impact India. Okay. So all that will form the part of our discourse with regards to the policies and interventions. At the face of it, it might sound a bit alarming that it is such a vast area, but it is very easy to demarcate when we say that we'll have to talk about the new policies and interventions. So these interventions would include not just a policy scheme or a program, it might include a law, it might include creation of a new institution or a ministry. For example, Ministry of Cooperation was created recently. So that forms of our interest with regards to this subject or this particular topic. So anything new which has come about, anything in news, at the same time anything which is completing, let us say 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, anything which has achieved or overshot its milestone, anything which is getting extended or revamped, for example, PM Poshan 2.0. So all these will form the part of our studies, and we'll have to not just look into the factual aspects of them, but also an appraisal, an analysis of what they are doing and how they are doing and how good or bad they are doing and what are the factors associated with them. Okay, let us see how these policies and interventions get reflected. So these two questions, one of 2019 and the other of 2021, allude to these policies and interventions. For example, the need for cooperation among various service sector has been inherent component of development discourse. Partnership bridges bring the gap among the sectors. It also sets in motion a culture of collaboration, team spirit. In light of this statement, we will have to analyze India's development process in general. So a very abstract one. So we'll need the fundamentals, the policies, their appraisal to answer this. Similarly, has the digital literacy, particularly in rural areas, coupled with lack of ICT accessibility, hindered socio-economic development? Examine with justification. So we'll need the Common Service Center, the BharatNet as components to build in for this particular answer. Okay, moving on. This particular topic in prelims is again, like I gave the example of the various interventions, that it can be a law or an agency. This question talks about the Legal Services Authority and presents us with various pillars in terms of what the Legal Services Authority does. So this is how this gets reflected in the prelim. So once we understand the thing holistically, it will be very easy for us to just answer these factual aspects as well as the deductive aspects if they are asked in the prelims examination. Moving on to the next heading. Transparency, accountability, and e-governance. When we talk about important aspects of governance, that would allude to the key concepts as well as areas like transparency, accountability, responsiveness, citizen centricity, participation, decentralization, participative decision making, okay, and many more. At the same time, we'll have to study what do we understand by transparency and accountability, the various methods to enforce transparency and accountability. For example, the RTI, Citizens Charter, okay, various institutions, for example, the Lokpal, Lokayukt, CVC, Central Information Commission, right? All those institutions and other stakeholders. At the same time, the e-governance and applications and models. For example, various models, the government to government, government to citizens, government to businesses, government to employees. What are the various models? What are the limitations? What are the challenges? What is the potential? This will bring along the contemporary developments in e-governance. For example, let us say Swamitva or Pragati dashboard. Projects like BharatNet, common service centers, right? Umang app, and many more contemporary discourse will form the part of e-governance and various models. So we'll be talking about their successes, where they are good, the limitations, for example, the digital divide, the lack of infrastructure, so on and so forth. At the same time, the potential, what we can achieve. Okay, the notions of accountability, horizontal accountability, vertical accountability, accountability within the government, accountability towards the citizens, the moral notions of accountability. All those will form the part of our discourse on transparency, accountability, and e-governance. Now let us look at the questions and how they manifest in the examination. So again, that interlinking theme is all pervasive, wherein the implementation of ICT based projects programs usually suffers in terms of certain vital factors. Identify these factors and suggest measures. So basically, it is talking about the challenges or limitations with regards to the information communication technology and e-governance. Then the next one, emergence of fourth industrial revolution has initiated e-governance as an integral part of government. Okay, so again, linking a contemporary development, the fourth industrial revolution, the blockchain, the AI, the 3D printing, the data sciences, with the Internet of Things, with e-governance. So we have to be very, very agile when it comes to the answering of questions, because we need those solid concepts, those solid models. For example, the government to government model or the government to citizen model. At the same time, link it with the contemporary perspective. Now let us look at the prelims. Aadhaar, the jam trinity, which has been a bedrock and a go-to vehicle or tool in the hands of government to deliver services efficiently, effectively, in a transparent manner, in a citizen-centric manner. All these concepts are the key concepts which we talked about, and the key concepts which we have been linking with various themes which we have divided. So it is talking about Aadhaar and the metadata stored for more than 3 months. So a contemporary development. Okay. Next, the social sector. Issues relating to social sector services like health, education, human resources. Within this, we can read between the lines and talk about employment, sanitation, sustainable development goals, the goal 3 and 4, especially with regards to health and education, and vice versa. Okay, so these are issues related to development and management. So we'll be talking about every policy program which is there, the government structure, for example, a Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and its good or bad or flaws. At the same time, Ministry of Education. Okay, various employment generation programs, sanitation programs like Swachh Bharat. as well as various reports, surveys, indices, rankings. For example, NIRF rankings. What is the framework? How do they govern? At the same time, linking these aspects with other aspects of governance. For example, education and human resources. Okay, to the aspect of, let us say, provision for industry or industrial workforce, education and employment. Okay, various schemes and programs like National Digital Health Mission, E-Sanjeevani Helpline, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, right to education, the National Education Policy, what frameworks does it propose, right? The National Health Policy, the wellness approach, the mental health, what the government is doing in this regard, how various stakeholders, the government, the market, the corporate social responsibility is pooling their energies to bring about a transformation in the social sector. Okay, all those things, the Skill India, right? Importance of skill, employment generation, National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, the Manrega, your Manrega, right? At the same time, National Rural Livelihoods Mission, how SHGs can help in better education and provision of health facilities, how various NGOs can partner various health agencies to deliver health care related services on the ground, right? So all these aspects will be covered. So hidden aspects like employment, sanitation, sustainable development goals, all these aspects will be there. More, let us look at through questions. So the very first question talks about the National Education Policy 2020, and it was asked in the year 2020, and it links with the Sustainable Development Goal 4. So again, the international connotation where India has in a way committed to achieve certain targets, intends to restructure and reorient education system. So how does NEP 2020 reorient the education system? Okay, besides being a moral imperative of welfare state, remember I talked about the concept of welfareism when I talked about the key concepts related to governance and social justice. So that has been linked with primary health structure, so in a way alluding to the local government or the grassroots level institution, necessary precondition for sustainable development. So linking all those concepts. So it's like we'll have to study all these topics and subheads separately for ease of studying, slot them in our brain as per the categorization, and use the picked portions of these categorization to frame an answer. That would be a better approach to implement the learnings. But for syllabus, we need to look them at separate heads. Let us look at the prelims aspect here. Food Safety and Standards Act 2006. So it is talking about a body, Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, related to health, of course, because the food is very, very important for health, or bad food can have implications for health. Though in this particular context, this statement turns out to be wrong, that it is under the Director General of Health Services. However, the allied aspect of food in terms of how food need nutrition, the healthcare, are interrelated. And to provide food and nutrition, you have various government schemes and programs, the midday meal scheme, the National Food Security Act, etc. So all those will also form the part of our discourse, right? At the same time, the interlinking, how a poor is poor because he or she is unemployed, that is leading to lack of education and provisioning for healthcare, and because they are poor, they are living in unorganized settlements where there is a problem of sanitation. That problem of sanitation is leading to prevalence of diseases. So we'll have to understand that governance, though for study we can basically compartmentalize our syllabus, but our approach should be very integrated. Okay, moving on, the issues relating to poverty and hunger. Again, the causes of poverty, the causes of hunger, the causes of poverty, the causes of hunger, all those form the part of our discourse. So when we talk about causes, first we'll have to talk about what do we understand by poverty and hunger, right? So there are various explanations regarding poverty, the poverty line concept, right? The calorie concept, the income concept. So all those concepts will have to be studied. Then obviously each of these concepts will have their merits and demerits, right? The evolution, the various committees, right? For example, the Rangarajan committee, the Tendulkar committee. So all those committees, commissions, right? Then the various indices, for example, global hunger index, the incidence of poverty and the various schemes related to poverty, for example, MG Narega. Okay, so all this have to be understood in the context of governance. So we'll have to talk about the efficacy, the analysis of all these schemes, the structural framework, the functional aspects. So if I talk about Manrega, how good it is implemented, how bad it is implemented, the aspect of social audit in Manrega, and how the social audit will link to the other subhead of transparency and accountability, which we have studied just a while ago. So all this needs to be interlinked. At the same time, with regards to poverty and hunger, we'll have to marshal certain facts from, for example, the latest National Family Health Survey 5, right? The census data, the various global reports which talk about prevalence. At the same time, look at it from the angle and lenses of various other themes, the themes like gender, that how women are the sufferers when it comes to there is scarcity of resources. From environment, the environmental impact on poverty, right? How unsustainable practices breeds further poverty and hunger. The impact on the production of food grains because of the climate change, and hence it leads to hunger. The form of hunger, the malnutrition, the wasting, okay, the stunting, all those aspects need to be studied here. Moving on, let us see the question. So this particular question talks about the social expenditure by government. So in a way referring to the financial aspect. Okay, so the question says there is a growing divergence in the relationship between poverty and hunger. In India, the shrinking social expenditure by the government is forcing poor to spend more on non-food essential items, squeezing their food budget. Elucidate. So we can talk about out-of-pocket expenditure on other non-food essential items, for example, health, which is squeezing the budget for food, leading to hunger or some form of hunger, whether we talk about malnutrition, stunting or wasting. Okay, so this interlinking again is very, very important. Okay, when we say that the shrinking social expenditure will have to use the budget to marshal certain facts to present the case. Similarly, the multidimensional poverty index report. So Niti Aayog comes up with various indices, reports and findings. One of them is the multidimensional poverty index. So we should know about the current index, the findings, the glaring observations which a particular report makes, and accordingly we need to think of the interventions which can be made to correct the course. So the incidence and intensity of poverty are more important in determining poverty based on income alone. So just like I said, various methods, the nutrition method, the calorie method of estimating poverty, the income method of estimating poverty, all those will come in handy as concepts, but at the same time we'll have to amalgamate the current developments regarding a particular dimension to justify the answer. So again, very interlinking approach is needed. Moving on, a similar question on National Nutrition Mission, which is related to obviously hunger, right? So this question reflects on that, and hence the various missions, the interventions are not just important for the prelims perspective, but their analysis, their appreciation is needed for the mains examination. Next, role of civil services in a democracy. So how the structure of civil services, the history of civil services, the role and importance of civil services, their training, recruitment, human resource policies, pay, perks, promotions, powers and functions, their larger role and the intellectual debate regarding the civil services and democracy, the civil services and development. When we say training, recruitment, etc., you will have contemporary developments like Mission Karam Yogi, the ethical issues and moral issues, the negative aspects of civil services like red tapeism, status quoism, inertia, all those elements will have to be studied, right? So the problems, the solutions, the various stakeholders, right? So all those things have to be studied, plus in the light of the theme, for example, gender, environment, liberalization, privatization, globalization, the changing profile of the civil services, the role of civil services in development and policy framing, all those aspects will go into this particular head. Now, let us look at a few questions which have been asked. So this particular question alludes to the values of civil services and a certain trait which is demanded out of them. So it talks about neutrality, effectiveness, okay, and gives a negative impression in the sense that it is lacking in the present context. And it talks about reform. So again, reform, just like I said, civil services reform, Mission Karam Yogi, etc. So all this will come handy here. At the same time, institutional quality is a crucial driver of economic performance. Okay, in this context, suggest reforms in civil services for strengthening democracy. So the civil services and democracy discourse, the theoretical as well as the practical underpinnings, the various traits which civil services and democracy has, and the contradiction or the seemingly contradicting traits of civil services and democracy. What is the purist orientation? What is the realistic orientation? All that will form the part of our discourse. Similarly, with regards to the prelims examination, okay, here a very deductive question is being asked in the sense that it's a question which is based on not just facts but also understanding. So in the context of India, which one of the following is the characteristic appropriate for bureaucracy? Okay, civil services bureaucracy. So an agency for the implementation of public policy. Okay. So obviously we had to choose the better one, right? So the core elements, the theoretical underpinnings as well as the contemporary orientations are very, very essential. Moving on. The regulatory bodies. Statutory, regulatory and various quasi-judicial bodies. So we can talk about a plethora of bodies there, basically CBI, SEBI, National Green Tribunal, NCLAT, IRDA, okay, National Commission for Women, and mind you, this will find mention in other places as well. For example, when we talk about regulatory bodies like TRAI, yes, it will find a mention here, as well as the laws and institutions which were there for government interventions in various sectors. So all these bodies, their history, need, powers, functions, structures, positives, negatives, issues, challenges, possible solution, some committee report or indices, right? The efficacy of these bodies. For example, recently there was a lot of news about tribunals, and a Tribunals Reforms Act was passed where some tribunals were merged, etc. So all this will form the part of discourse. Let us see through questions. So it is about CAT, the Central Administration Tribunal, which was established for redressal of grievances and complaints by or against central government employees. Nowadays is exercising its powers as an independent judicial authority. So we'll have to delve into the structure, the manner of functioning of these various bodies. Similarly, on the Human Rights Commission, we have a question analyzing their structural and practical limitations. For example, a lot of investigation which is being carried out by human rights human rights commissions have people deputed from the police department to carry out those investigations and findings, and more often than not we see some sort of a government agency which violates the human rights, more often than not security agencies and police. So how can one of their own investigate against his or her own department? So those are the kind of the structural and practical limitations which the National Human Rights Commission encounters. Similarly, for every such body and institution, we'll have to study in terms of the demarcation of the area. Again, anything which is new, which has been in news, as well as the standard institutions of transparency, accountability, catering to certain sections, for example, women, children, environment, all those things become important. Let us see how this gets reflected in the prelims. So again, a regulation related to the telecommunications. Okay. So how various committees and departments are found to be related in the exercise of regulation. Moving on. The welfare schemes for vulnerable sections. So in this, first we need to identify what are those vulnerable sections. The sections like SC, ST, OBC, women, the disabled or differently abled, right, transgenders, children, elderly, migrants, etc. So regarding all those vulnerable sections, we'll have to talk about the various welfare schemes. What are the positives, negatives, pros and cons of those schemes? At the same time, the performance of these schemes. So that means we are alluding to analysis, that how good or bad or how successful or limited success a particular scheme or an intervention has been. At the same time, the mechanisms, laws, institutions and bodies, your National Commission for Women, the National Commission for Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribes, and all this. So they can be linked to the bodies part of regulatory bodies, wherein some of them have a constitutional status, some of them have a statutory status, right? Some of them have been vested with certain powers to adjudicate, so on and so forth. At the same time, the various schemes related to scholarships, minorities are also vulnerable. Okay, so for protection and betterment of these vulnerable sections, so the institutions, the laws, for example, the Transgenders Rights Act or the SC and ST Prevention of Atrocities Act, all those laws and their appraisal will be needed. Let us see how mains show this up. So performance of welfare schemes that are implemented for vulnerable sections is not so effective due to absence of their awareness and active involvement. So it is talking about the participation. Again, a key concept which we talked about during the key concept segment which we discussed. At the same time, looking at it from the lens of the performance of the welfare schemes. So interlinking the two heads. At the same time, alluding to a particular scheme, that is earn value learn scheme, needs to be strengthened to make vocational education and skill training meaningful. Okay, so it is linking education, skill training and a particular scheme, right? Similarly, let us see the prelims aspect of it, wherein we are talking about the MP Lads Fund. Okay, again, for development of a district for certain vulnerable populations, right? So all this will form the part of our discourse. So when we say governance and social justice, we'll have to interlink, and that is the central theme. To understand the syllabus, we'll have to delve deeper into the dimensions which can be asked, and those dimensions have amply been demonstrated through questions as part of this sessions. Though those dimensions are not exhaustive, there can be more dimensions tomorrow, right? For example, the fourth industrial revolution question which we talked about the e-governance. How can fourth industrial revolution and the tools be used to empower local governments can be an area which might be asked. You never know. So all this interlinking is very, very central to understand and answer the questions in the examination. However, for our studies, it is very, very important that we categorize the syllabus in an orderly fashion, study those aspects, and once we have acquired the knowledge of those fundamental building blocks, and then we can build the edifice for a particular answer by picking and choosing those sections of our understanding and interpreting them in the dimension which the question wants us to do. So that was all regarding the threadbare analysis of syllabus for governance and social justice. Thank you.